Welcome to Pullback. I'm Kyla, and I'm here with Kristen.
Heyo.
Each episode, we challenge ourselves to try something new in ethical consumption, and then we tell you what we learned, fuck-ups and all. This episode is going to be all about Plastic-Free July. I feel like, this one had the challenge baked into it, which was amazing. We didn't have to think of anything, although...
Unfortunately, it was the worst challenge ever. I would take a week of waste-free over a month of plastic-free any day.
It's true. It's painful. Well, and we recorded for the first 2 weeks, we recorded like progress reports. And I'm going to insert those at some point in this episode, maybe right here. So how's yours going so far for the first week?
So I think mine's going mostly really well. Part of the reason for that is that I managed to have a really efficient grocery shop before Plastic-Free July, I guess June, whatever month this is.
We can call it Plastic-Free July. I don't want to confuse us more than necessary.
Before our Plastic-Free challenge started.
Yeah, there you go.
So I haven't been grocery shopping in the entire span that this month has been. So it has not posed any challenges for plastic groceries, which I know is going to be a huge issue when I do have to go grocery shopping tomorrow. But I am really upset because, I hope you agree on this. I have personally found the most complicated thing trying to get snacks that don't involve plastic. Every snack involves plastic. It's so annoying.
That's true. No, you're right. But you said you were making chocolate from scratch or something?
No, I might do that later in the month. Today, I was like, you know what? I want some ice cream. And there's a gelato place near me that's open. Perfect. So I went in there, I looked, I saw that they had cones. I was like, that's perfect. I'll just get a cone. And as I was ordering and she was giving it to me, she flips the cone over and puts it in a disposable plastic cup for me to grab it, which is apparently their pandemic protocol right now. So,
oh no!
I understand pandemic safety, but I was trying so hard to be plastic free. And at the very end of the transaction, when I had already paid and the product was already out, I couldn't take it back. I just kind of sighed a little sigh and said thank you and left. It's just so disappointing.
I've done this challenge before, and it was really hard even when there wasn't a pandemic happening and everybody became suddenly obsessed with disposable plastic. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to be the one to sit here and, shit on that because people are dying, but it does make the challenge very difficult.
It's just have a cone holder. I get that this is a short-term thing. They may not necessarily want to buy one, but those are things that exist and they're not single use, and you just put the cone there and then I can grab it myself.
You should buy them one and bring it to the store.
I think that might be perceived as passive-aggressive.
Nice. Yeah. I did the same thing as you. I went grocery shopping at the end of May just to kind of give myself a bit of a
soft landing.
A good head start, yeah, for June. So I also haven't had to go grocery shopping. I did buy a bicycle recently so that I could ride my bike to work instead of taking transit.
Your bike's so pretty.
Thank you. It is very pretty. It is pink and it's got this classic look to it. I'll post about it on Instagram when this comes out. But it had a booklet attached to it that came in plastic. I had to buy a helmet, and unless I wanted to spend $500 on a helmet carved from wood that had to be shipped in from the UK, I really couldn't find anything else that wasn't made from plastic. But girls gotta protect your noggin, so otherwise I think I'm doing okay, but it's early days yet. I think we'll both have done a grocery shop by the time we do our next check-in, so...
Yeah, definitely today was a very, I'll just put it this way. The meal that I had for dinner was just food scrap broth that I made with only noodles in it because I have no other items in my fridge.
Cool. So you're going tomorrow.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I'll be going tomorrow morning.
Nice. All right. Well, then I'll catch up with you next week on this one.
Sounds good.
Okay, hello now from week 2.
So how did your week go?
Good. I only failed twice.
Nice.
Once was yesterday. I got Tim Hortons, and I was really specific about not having them put a lid on it, because obviously I can't bring my reusable mug right now, but I can just like have a lidless, paper cup.
I think those are covered in plastic, actually.
What?
But
that's news
that's why
to me.
They're so hard to recycle.
No, really? I thought they were compostable. Oh,
yeah,
no.
I'm pretty sure there's a... Just let me Google this. I don't want to give people the wrong information. Yeah. Sorry, bud.
Oh, no. I thought the cups were fine. What about Starbucks?
I mean, I think you can recycle them in some way. It's just that for most municipalities, it's too expensive and the material you get isn't very valuable. So usually they don't.
But it's like paper.
It's paper, but it's covered in a coating of polyethylene plastic, it's like the same as if you get like a paper ice cream tin, which is one of the ways I failed this week.
God damn it. I thought I was doing okay. Okay,
sorry.
They didn't give me a plastic lid at least, although I guess apparently that didn't make a difference. The way that I failed is that I got a tea and they put a tea bag in it, and then after I was halfway through drinking it and I was like, oh, this tea bag is probably made of plastic.
Yeah. They're all nylon, I think, for the most part, aren't they?
Well, that's a terrible shame. So I failed 3 times then. There was the Tim Hortons that had the tea bag and the cup that I didn't even think about. And oh man, that must be true of like McDonald's. Everything. Just all of those cups. God damn it. I'm such a fool. All right. What about you? Did you do okay this week?
No, I had, I guess depending on how you count it, either 2 or 3 fails. I don't feel so bad about them. Actually, no, 3 or 4 fails because the ice cream tin, that was one. That was just a straight up fail. The other 2 were kind of tricky. So one of them, I discovered that the like valve cap on my bicycle was missing for one of my tires. And like, you need those. They keep air in the tires. So I bought a package of those, and the caps themselves are plastic and they're covered in plastic. So that was plastic. But there's really no other way to get them. Like, even if you buy a metal one, you've got to get it covered in plastic of some kind.
Yeah.
So.
What are you going to do?
I actually found the grocery shop was not hard at all, which is surprising to me. Yeah.
You were worried about that.
I was, yeah. It did require that I chose to get cherry tomatoes because they were selling them loose instead of getting like grape tomatoes or something. But like that was, and yeah, I picked a mini cucumber because they were selling those loose rather than getting a bigger one.
Do they all have stickers on them? Do the stickers count?
Yeah, they have stickers, but like you can't eat. So I'm not counting the stickers because they just all have them.
Okay, cool. Well, that's not so bad then. We're halfway through now, so.
Woo! I really want chips.
Oh my God. Yeah, I don't know. Snack food. How have your last 2 weeks been?
So my last 2 weeks, I feel like I kind of fell off the plastic-free bandwagon hard, mostly in the form of chips.
No, you couldn't go a month without chips, Kristen.
I could not. And I'm going to have to examine some parts of my life, not revelation about myself.
I went without chocolate milk. I didn't know you were cheating for chips.
Got 2 bags of chips.
I waited.
And they were glorious.
I got chocolate milk yesterday. We're recording this on July 3rd. I bought chocolate milk yesterday and I drank a liter in like a sitting because I just missed it so much. My chocolate almond milk. It has like one plastic nozzle on the top and the rest of it is fine, but I was being as strict as I could this month.
That's amazing. I'm super proud of you and super not proud of me.
I don't know. If 2 chips is all you got, then I still think you did a better job than I did.
I also, because early in the month, I'm sure we talked about this, but I had like a few orders that I'd placed that I hadn't received, so I got packaging from that. And then there's some other areas, like I had to buy toilet paper at like the end of the month. I really thought I was going to go the whole month without having to get toilet paper, but didn't work out that way. And it was covered in plastic, so nothing I could do about that. It was an emergency situation.
Couldn't you go and get like the toilet paper that comes wrapped in like paper? You know, the one-offs?
No, because the Waste-Free store is the only one that sells it, and they are only do deliveries Tuesday to Friday, and you have to give them 24 hours notice. So it did not work in this situation.
Well, I guess we're not ready for toilet paper free life yet. Although that'll probably be a challenge in the future. I don't know.
Well, I was thinking about getting a bidet, but then it has plastic in it, so I don't know.
Yeah, so you're like, I might as well just go with the toilet paper. It's easier.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, sorry, go ahead. How was your 2 weeks?
I bought bananas and they were like organic and they had like a plastic thing on the top of them. What's that about?
I don't know what that's about, but I've seen that in a few places before.
Maybe it like keeps them fresh. I don't know. They were too green and I didn't end up getting to eat most of them anyways. Like I tried to let them ripen, but it just wasn't happening. It's been like a week and a half and I had to just give up. I was like, no, these bananas it's not gonna happen. Yeah. A couple of times I failed because my boyfriend surprised me. So he surprised me with Starbucks and a picnic. And the picnic was just like, yeah, it was really sweet. And I didn't say anything to him about it because he knew I was doing the challenge, but he forgets too. So he got me like a Starbucks and like some bread to go with this picnic and a couple of other things that were like kind of plastic. And I was like, well, this is so sweet that I'm not going to shame him for it. But then the next day he was like, oh, do you want to do something that involves plastic? I can't remember what. And I was like, oh no, plastic free. And he was like, oh no, our picnic yesterday. And I was like, it's fine. I can make an exception for romantic gestures.
Yeah, it's like the zero waste policy. Like, you don't shit on the gifts, just like, save it for like a few months from now to remind people. Or in the case of our podcast challenges, I feel like it's such a burden on the people in our lives. Trying to remember what particular challenge we're on at any time.
I know. I didn't say anything. I was like, yeah. So another way that I failed was I don't know if this is the same as your chips thing, but I broke down and bought some weed. They come in the plastic containers.
Yeah, it's impossible to get that without plastic.
The last way I failed was pretty big. It's going to make you feel a lot better about your chips.
Yay. To be honest, I feel great about the chips.
No regrets. I went camping and I don't have like much camping stuff. So we were able to borrow a lot of it from friends and family, but I ended up having to buy like we didn't want to go super rough and just sleep straight on the ground. I was fine with that idea, but my boyfriend was like, absolutely not. I draw the line. So we bought like a foam camping mattress because I can't sleep on an air mattress. They're the worst. Otherwise, I think I did pretty good.
Yeah, it's an impossible challenge. So like even I was looking at the Plastic Free July website today and they don't even have like a don't use any. I mean, they have like the option you can click and say, I'm going to use no plastic, but most of it's geared around not using single-use plastic because it's just impossible. I was thinking about it. One of the thoughts I had was, okay, we've done this whole month. I haven't succeeded the whole time, but mostly it's focusing on not buying single-use plastic or like new plastic items. Can I go a day without using any plastic? And no is the answer. I don't even think I would have gotten an hour. Like, my laptop has a bunch of plastic in it. There's plastic in most of the appliances I have. Like, it's just so ubiquitous to our lives that, I don't know, it's a really, really hard challenge to fulfill, I think.
I think it's one of my favorite challenges, because I've done it before, the Plastic Free July, and even doing it now, I found it a lot easier this time because I've done it before. But the first time I did it, people listening, honestly, I really recommend this challenge. It's eye-opening. It's fun. It's kind of fun, honestly. Like it's one of my more enjoyable experiences doing a challenge for this podcast. And every time I do it, I kind of like, because this is the second time now. And I went grocery shopping yesterday and I was off the hook. I could buy anything I wanted. And there was a bunch of stuff that I had on my wish list for the last month, like I'm super lazy and I like to get my garlic pre-crushed in a tub. And
oh no, Kyla, we have to do an episode on human rights in that. But
oh no! Well, okay, it's fine because
actually, I'll just let you enjoy that for a while.
No, it's fine because I went to get some yesterday and I was like, do you know what? I can just crush my own garlic. So that's the nice thing about doing a whole challenge for a month. Like, our Veganuary made me way better at being vegan too. So
that's true. Yeah, there are some minor produce changes that I'll probably, I'll never switch back to the hearts of romaine because they're covered in plastic when you can get a perfectly good whole head of romaine that isn't.
All right. So do you want to tell me all of the horrible things you've researched about plastic for this episode?
Yeah, but first I want to give just a little plug for Plastic Free July. It just feels like a nice thing to do.
Yeah, because it's an actual organization. When I first did it, I thought it was just like a hashtag or something.
Yeah, so it's kind of like Plastic Free July is sort of similar to Veganuary in a lot of ways. It's basically an awareness-raising campaign where people pledge to change their behavior for a designated month of the year. In this case, July instead of January. And the idea is basically, if you can live for a month trying to either get rid of single-use plastics or trying not to use any plastics at all, that's going to prompt a lot of sort of ideas about how ingrained plastic is and where are areas where you use a lot of plastic. For me, I learned that chips are where I use a lot of plastic. So I'm definitely going to be looking for plastic-free alternatives in the future. And the idea is that this month challenge, you're doing something that's really hard and probably for most people isn't going to be possible to continue over the long term. But with the idea that in the future, you can become more flexible, but the things that you've learned or the sort of horrifying moments of realization you've had are going to sort of carry forward. It is Plastic Free July is run by the Plastic Free Foundation, which is based in Australia, and they claim to have inspired over 250 million participants in 177 countries. So I couldn't find, Veganuary actually had, a list of how many people had pledged that year, which I wasn't able to find for Plastic Free July, but they claim to have a pretty big following over their history. So if you are interested, we've got a link to them on the website. Otherwise, you can just Google Plastic Free July. It'll come up. And you can sign on for different levels of the challenge. So one level is to avoid single-use plastic packaging. Another one is to eliminate the top 4 takeaway items, which are bags, bottles, straws, and coffee cups. And then the last option, which is sort of like the hard alternative, is to go completely plastic-free. You can also sign on to Plastic Free July if you're a business, or let's say you're already a plastic-free maven and you want to help organize local events. They also offer that option, so definitely check it out.
Cool. Yeah. I don't know. I found it really valuable just for personally noticing. The first time I did it, it just blew me away. I was like, oh, literally everything is plastic and we're drowning in it. Cool. And you might know
and breathing it. Fun times.
Yes. Great. Yeah. I'm excited to hear more about that. But it's one of those things where it's yeah, you know it, but until you start doing the challenge, you don't. It's you kind of feel it at the end. You're like, oh, it's sunk in,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And just realizing how constrained you are in various elements of your life. I think it's particularly hard in a pandemic. A lot of the things I felt I was depriving myself of were things that in an ordinary life I wouldn't be, just that idea, okay, maybe I want a takeaway coffee or something. That wasn't an option at all because there are no reusable cups that are allowed right now. But if you were doing this in a non-pandemic year, that might not be a constraint that you have. So there is that.
I will say I saved a lot of money this month. My grocery bill.
Yeah, you can't buy anything.
Yeah, my grocery bill was a third of what it normally is. So,
I mean, I think mine slightly went up because I was going to the nicer produce store that has no plastic in basically anything. So Wasn't actually cheaper for me. But
I just refused to go shopping. I just stretched out all my meals and cooked everything in my house. And I only ended up going shopping twice.
I ran through all the noodles in my house. That was the thing that happened near the end that I forgot to say. You can't buy noodles that aren't covered in plastic. It's impossible. So it was really touch and go there for a bit.
Can't you make your own noodles?
Yeah, I can, but can I? In theory, I could. But I do not have that kind of time. All right. So should we talk about what plastic is?
Yeah, because we talked about this in our first 2 plastic-free check-ins. I was getting takeaway cups from like McDonald's and Starbucks, and you were like, no, Kyla, those have plastic. And I was like, what? They feel like paper.
Yeah, there's so much that like a lot of items these days have plastic as like one material of many in them. And it's tough because even more so than something that's just purely plastic, that's like really hard to recycle, which is one of the challenges with plastic that we'll get into later. But essentially, part of the problem is plastic is what I wanted to do was to find a nice, easy definition of what plastic is. I thought for my own personal self, that would ground me, help me to explain plastic. But it turns out plastic is like thousands of things and it's really complicated. So here we go. The word plastic is derived from the Greek word plastikos, which basically means it's fit for molding. And so that's more or less the property around which anything that's called plastic is based. So rather than being like one material, plastic is actually like a range of synthetic and semi-synthetic materials that have the property of plasticity. So that means they're capable of being molded or shaped. And plastics often as well have a low density. They often don't conduct electricity very well. They're often sort of transparent, and they're often sort of like a hardier material. But in some cases, plastics aren't any of those things. The sort of core characteristic is that they're plastic. They have plasticity.
Great definition.
I said all those words to get to plastic is plastic. Anyway, so when we talk about plastics today, we're usually referring to synthetic polymers, which are basically materials that are made of long repeating chains of molecules. I don't know what that means. Chemists can tell me maybe. But there are also natural polymers, and that includes things like rubber, wood, and even proteins are polymers. So plastics are synthetic polymers, I guess. But not all polymers are plastics. I don't know. I'm not a chemist. There's a reason that's true. So that basically, when you want to make a plastic, you have to start from something called a monomer, or multiple monomers. And those monomers, I don't know what they are. They're transformed into polymers through something called polymerization, which makes sense. So it's like a chemical process in which one thing's turned into another thing. And then the polymers are basically like processed into resins, and then that's used to make final products. I don't know, man. Usually I have a better explanation of how things are made, but plastics, honestly, they are very sciencey, and that is part of the reason that they were super loved in the 30s and 40s, because they were seen as like a sign of progress and how like man had mastered the universe. Like our straws.
Is plastic... Okay, forgive me if this is the dumbest question ever, although...
it's probably not.
I thought plastics... Maybe it's not all plastics, but I thought most plastics were like an offshoot of the oil industry.
They are, yeah. So yes. Not all plastics are petroleum-based, but most of the ones we use today are. So there are some like... I'll get into this when I talk about the history of plastic a little bit, but there are some non-petroleum-based plastics, especially historically. But today, plastic is mostly a petroleum byproduct. And in fact, it's the third most commonly used petroleum derivative in the world. So there are 200 million tons of plastic that are used annually worldwide. And most of that is coming from like petroleum products, basically.
What if plastic is so ubiquitous? What is being produced more than plastic if it's third?
Oil.
Okay, fair.
It's a plastics episode, Kyla.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I'm going way down the rabbit hole.
I can
on that
barely
one.
describe what plastics are. I don't know. So yeah, the plastics sort of do have a long history-ish, but mostly they originate in like the 1800s and later. The first recorded mention of early natural plastics was in 1284. And at that time, what plastics basically meant was things like horn and tortoiseshell. So they had some characteristics of plasticity, but they weren't plastics in the way that we would sort of identify them today. So really, the history of plastics doesn't come until the late 1800s. One of the major developments is the invention of something called parkezine, which is also called celluloid. And it was basically the first commercial man-made version of plastic. It's not super widely used anymore because it's highly flammable and it's expensive to produce. Two things you don't really want. At the time, it was a really big development. So then there were like a few other kinds of plastic products that were invented throughout the late 1800s. The next big breakthrough comes in 1907 when someone named Leo Baekeland, he invented something that he called Bakelite. So, a little nod to himself there. Humble guy, as one can tell.
Wow. Wow. Fuck that guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I love it, but also, yikes.
Yeah. He seemed like a bit of a narcissist. I didn't go into his history that much, but...
And I mean, he invented something that has led us down a path of horror, so, you know.
At the time, it was viewed as amazing, though, right? Like, so Bakelite was the first truly synthetic plastic, and it, like... Actually, I'll just tell you how Bakelite, the corporation, described their product. So they basically had this ad that claimed that humans had transcended the old taxonomy of animal, mineral, and vegetable. So instead, the world had a fourth kingdom whose boundaries are unlimited. And that, for them, was plastic, which is, I think, eerily true given the situation we have environmentally, but not in the way they meant it.
No, they meant it in a more positive spin than I think. I mean, I don't know. Plastic is so complex because obviously our medical system is as amazing as it is because of plastic. And we have so many amazing things because of plastic. And it's like,
yes.
Oh, boy. Like, I mean.
Yeah, it made a lot of stuff possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so this is like part of the challenge, right? It's like the early 1900s, plastic is this amazing product that is sort of just becoming mastered by, scientists and then being commercialized for the first time. You start to see things like nylon stockings start to get produced, which were super popular. The Rolls-Royce starts using plastic in its car interiors, and that's something that, to this day, you can have lighter cars because they use plastic parts, right? So plastic has a lot of super useful properties that make it a wonder product, but at the same time, we're now sort of reckoning with the fact that we're using a lot of shit plastic for like things we probably don't need to have plastic for. So yeah, there's this period of development. Plastics really sort of gets its commercial foot in the door during the Second World War, because then it starts to get used in a bunch of military applications. So it's used in parachutes, it's used in grenades, it's used in airplanes, it's used in a bunch of other stuff. And then when the war ends, plastic companies that were geared toward military production start to market their material for consumers. And in particular, that starts to be the development of disposable plastics as part of like the consumer revolution, right? We talked about this in the zero waste episode, that plastic becomes this, and throwaway materials generally become this sort of time saver for wives. They become this convenience material that people really glom onto. And suddenly we're selling more and more plastic. And by 1979, we're actually producing, for the first time, more plastic than we're producing steel in the world. And I didn't specifically look it up, but I imagine that's true today because plastic's been on an upward trajectory. So in recent years, that shift has primarily been from durable plastics to single-use plastics, which is a lot of the problem that we'll get into. I want to talk a little bit about types of plastics. This may be a bit of a boring section, but it's really important for part of the episode later, so I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, hit me. I'm ready.
So there are lots of different kinds of plastic. I'm not going to even scratch the surface in terms of talking about all of them. But generally, you can think about two different categories of plastics. The first one is thermoset plastics. And those are plastics that basically, once they're cooled and hardened, they retain their shapes and they can't return to their original form. So those are sort of like the hard and durable plastics. The other kind of plastic consists of thermoplastics. So they're less rigid, they can soften upon heating, and they return to their original form. They're easily molded and extruded into fibers and like films and packaging. So those are the ones that you'll often see today because, we often use them in packaging formats and things like that. I'm going to talk about a few particular kinds of plastics. These are ones that you'll probably use in many different applications of your life, but if you're like me, you've maybe heard of a couple of these, but you didn't really, I don't know. I didn't really know most of these. I'd heard a few of them mentioned, but do you know of any kinds of plastics before I jump into these?
Nope. I mean, maybe. Maybe you'll say something.
Yeah, you'll probably have heard of a couple of these.
Exactly.
But yeah, the recall from nothing. I couldn't have named a plastic if you'd asked me to before.
Wait, hang on. Let me just pause for a second and think. No.
Okay, so the first one is called polyethylene, and you might see this sometimes on packages as PE. And it's the most common polymer that's used in plastics. So you'll see two main variants of polyethylene. The first one is low density polyethylene, so LDPE. And that's the stuff that you find in grocery bags, plastic film, and bread bags, that kind of thing. So LDPE it's sort of like a cheap, but it's a cheap throwaway plastic, basically, that's pretty moldable. Then there's high density polyethylene, which is a stiffer plastic, and it's used in like more robust plastic packaging. So if you've got like a laundry detergent container that's plastic, it's probably HDPE, shampoo bottles, milk jugs, if you're not from a province that uses bagged milk for reasons I don't understand. So yeah, if you have like trash bins too, they might be HDPE plastic. The next one is polyethylene terephthalate.
Wow.
I think that's how you say it.
Good job.
A lot of consonants in a row on that one. So you'll often see this one as PET or PETE. And it's the most widely used plastic in the world. It's used predominantly in our friend polyester. Shout out to the clothing episode. And it's also used in bottles and packaging. So if you have Ziploc bags, that's the main plastic that Ziploc bags use. And it's also used in things like cake trays.
Wait, polyester is the same material as Ziploc bags?
Yes, indeed.
What?
I mean, there are like some differences, I imagine.
No, of course, but like fundamentally.
Same base compound, yeah.
Yeah, boils down to being the same stuff. Wow.
So instead of being the like paper bag princess, we're all kind of like the plastic bag princesses.
It's a nice little Canadian Robert Munch shout out there. I actually loved the paper bag princess.
I didn't realize that was a Canadian thing.
Yeah, I didn't know that either until I lived abroad. And I was like, oh, the paper bag princess. And people are like, the what? And I was like, no, stop it.
That's a really good children's book. Y'all should find it. So the next one is polyvinyl chloride, or PVC, or just vinyl. And it's strong, rigid, and brittle. It's a plastic that's often used in construction. So you might have heard the term PVC pipe before. That's because it's pipe made out of PVC. Vinyl sidings. I don't know how common that is elsewhere in the world, but in Canada it's super common because we get weather. So if you have that on your house, it's made of PVC. Might also be in mouthwash bottles and some clear food packaging as well. All right, 2 more to go through. Swear we're almost done. So polypropylene, or PP, is a semi-transparent plastic, and it has like a low friction surface, so stuff doesn't stick to it very well. And so it's used in things like cheese containers, syrup bottles, and yogurt containers. Things you don't want food to stick to. Makes sense.
Sure, yeah.
And then the last one is one you will have probably heard of before. It's polystyrene, also called PS or styrofoam.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense.
Yeah, styrofoam. That's the only one I had like for sure heard of before. It's used in packaging. It's also used in soft drink lids, takeaway containers, and it also is used in medical devices like test tubes.
So are those all of the different types of plastic, or...
Goodness, no. I actually, I had compiled a list twice as long as this, and I was like, no, these are the ones I absolutely need to talk about because they come up later in the episode. That was it. There are many other types of plastic, but these are like the most common ones, I would say, although you're definitely using other kinds of plastic in your life. You just, I don't know what they are.
Fair enough.
Yeah, there's a lot of plastic in our world. So I want to talk briefly about the environment in plastics. I don't want to go into it in too much detail because we do have an upcoming interview with Sarah King at Greenpeace, and I imagine she's going to tell us a lot more about that, so I don't want to steal her thunder on this. But I do want to sort of just contextualize why we care about plastics before we start talking about solutions, because otherwise that doesn't really make sense. Okay, so if you want more information on environment and plastics and don't want to wait for the new episode, we have already sort of introduced this topic briefly in our zero waste episode, so you can listen to that. Essentially, we've produced 320 million metric tons of plastic. There's a fuck ton of plastic out there. The volume of plastic is the weight of the plastic that we have produced in the world is heavier than every human alive combined. There's a lot of plastic in the world.
And it lasts forever.
It lasts, for hundreds, possibly thousands of years. We don't really know. And the amount of plastic that we have is set to double by 2040. That's a lot of plastic. We don't have a good plan for dealing with it, and it's going to stick around for ages. There are 4 main environmental problems that causes. So the first one is emissions. Because plastic is primarily a petroleum byproduct, it contributes to climate change. Second one is pollution. The vast amount of plastics that we dispose every year in our packaging containers and clothing are polluting our land and water environment. And third, and connected to this, is animals. When plastic ends up in ecosystems, it can kill animals who ingest it or who become entangled in it. So in the Zero Waste episode, we talk about that albatross chick that had starved because their stomach was full of plastic. That's the kind of thing that animals die from. And lastly, microplastics, which is sort of the big rising issue that we know is bad, but scientists are still working on understanding how bad. So essentially, there's a recent discovery that plastics, even though they don't biodegrade for hundreds of years, they shed microplastics pretty much right away. And that gets into our air, soil, and water. We talked about that a little in our laundry episode. But basically, plastic microfibers have been found in some of the most remote ecosystems in the world. And pretty much all the time, we are breathing, drinking, and eating plastic. It's just everywhere, these microplastics.
And when people talk about I know you've been looking into this a little bit actually, but the plastic problem with our oceans, isn't a huge part of that problem the fact that we can't, the plastic is too small for us to collect it even if we tried?
Yeah, that's part of the problem. We can't really collect the microplastics. And scientists, they're still working on understanding which microplastics are harmful in which ways to humans and animals, but there have already been some studies that have found that microplastics are harmful for animals and humans. So it's not good for us. It's everywhere. It'll probably never go away because we just have so much plastic and all of it is shedding these microfibers. And it gets into our water systems and into our air. So it's a big problem.
That is bleak.
Yeah, there are lots of reasons that we would want to not have as much plastic produced. So what I want to talk about next is sort of a few debates on what the solutions are. The first one is the question of recycling plastics. Any initial impressions before we go into that?
Can you even do it?
The TLDR of this section. Yeah, that's a big problem. And like, I think we're going to do a recycling episode, so I don't want to go into too much depth on the problems with our recycling systems. But I'll just say not a lot of plastic gets recycled. So of all the plastic that we've produced so far, only about 14% has ever been collected for recycling, and only 5% has actually ever been recycled. So the vast majority of plastic that's out there is not getting recycled.
Well, and I know that when you do recycle it, it turns it into like a lower quality product, and then that can't really be recycled afterwards. Or there's like a finite number of times you can recycle it, and then it just has to go in the bin. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're right. Depending on the product, and like if it's a compound, it's often harder to recycle, and some materials are more recyclable than others. But sometimes you can get a one-to-one recycling. Like glass is pretty good for that. You can pretty much produce glass from glass again. But depending on what kind of plastic and in what sort of forms it's in, and if it's in a compound, you may not be able to produce something that can look anything like the thing that it was then after you've recycled it, for sure. And that means there are limitations to how many uses you can get out of plastic. But it's more or less a moot point because we're mostly not recycling any of the plastic we produce anyway.
Even the stuff you put in the recycling doesn't really get treated a lot, which is, it sucks because a lot of plastic containers now are putting like little recycling symbols on them, but it's like, oh, only if you have a specific recycling facility that you can bring it to, or I don't know. Like then there's so many different levels of plastic that it's like, I don't know. I don't even know. And I'm like, I care a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the recycling codes because those are super important. It's important to know that, so the recyclable symbol on its own doesn't really tell you a lot because in theory, pretty much any plastic can be recycled. It's just a question of whether it will be recycled, basically. And that's two layers, right? One is like, does your municipality say it in theory recycles this thing? And the second thing is the problem that, you know, no plastics recycling basically is going on in the world right now because China has stopped doing it. So that's a whole other layer we're not even going to get into. But what are some things you can think about if you're trying to recycle your plastics? So the first thing, it's super important to follow good recycling etiquette. And that means if you've got little strands of plastic, you want to make sure that they're sort of accumulated together because otherwise little items will get lost. Also, make sure that you rinse any food or grease from your plastic. The reason for that is that it's primarily for if you're not, like if you've got a recycling system where you also have paper in it or other products like that, the grease or food residue can actually ruin the paper, so it can't be recycled. So you want to make sure that it's clean. It doesn't have to be like immaculate though. That's okay. Just rinse it. So after you've rinsed your plastic and you've just trying to decide whether to put it in the bin, it's important to pay attention to the number and letter code that's on the plastic. So that refers basically to what type of plastic it is, which will determine whether you can recycle it or not. So generally speaking, lower number plastics are more likely to be recycled. The number is going to be between 1 and 7. If you see one with a plastic code 1, that means it is polyethylene terephthalate /PET PETE. And that one is usually it'll be recyclable in curbside. So code number 1 is good. Code number 2 is high density polyethylene or HDPE. That's also good. So 1 and 2 can both go in the recycling bin usually. And the other one that almost always is allowed in curbside pickup is number 5 or polypropylene /PP. So if you see codes 1, 2, or 5, it's pretty likely that your municipality will accept it, so you can put it in. If you have plastic number 3, so that's the vinyl or PVC, generally you can't use curbside pickup, but you typically will be able to find some recycling program that can take it. So either sometimes there'll be companies that you can bring it to, or in some cases your municipality will have it. It just won't be part of the curbside collection. So definitely look into that. Plastics number 4 and 6 are going to be tougher. So plastic number 4 is that low density polyethylene or LDPE. So that's like the wraps and things like that. It's usually not collectible in curbside bins, nor is 6, which is styrofoam. And it's important to note that like both of those can be recycled. They just aren't economical to recycle usually because they're not very valuable plastics. And so usually it's not profitable for like the recycling companies to recycle them. Having said that, you should look into recycling programs in your area because like there's a lot of activism around this kind of stuff. And there may be programs available where you can recycle those kinds of plastic. You'll have to do more than just putting it in your curbside bin because it's just going to get thrown out if it's in the curbside bin.
And it's tricky. It's not as easy as just saying, like, don't use styrofoam because when you order something online, which a lot of us are doing more often lately thanks to COVID, you never know how they're going to send it, right? Like,
yeah. Although you can say no plastic and sometimes they'll honor that. So I would always recommend that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. They won't always, but sometimes they will. It's a good option.
Yeah, it depends on the company, I guess.
Yeah. The last plastics number is number 7, and that is mixed plastics, and it's usually just not recyclable. So if you see a number 7, I probably don't bother with it. All right, that was all the plastic types.
I'm exhausted. I don't know how you do all this research.
My God, when it took me like an hour to come up with something approximating a definition of plastic. Like,
yeah, there's a lot going on.
It's how they get you. They just science it.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. Like,
yes,
it's a lot. There's a lot going on.
Yes. All right. So now we'll talk about sort of the next option. So recycling, that's an option, but it's not perfect. A lot of the times plastic doesn't get recycled or it isn't recyclable in your local area. Or even if you're doing your best, more or less there's a stall on all plastics recycling right now. So it's not a great solution. So what about bioplastics? That's another thing that people often say. I know personally, I don't know whether I talked about this in our plastic-free updates. So maybe now would be a good time to add it if I did.
And if not, maybe we'll just mention it again. So yeah. I actually had a question about that because
But I didn't say the thing yet.
One of the ways that I failed was that I had like a lunch from it's like where was it? Like a Mexican place or a burrito place? I don't know. But they do a lot of, they try to be as eco-friendly as possible. Everything comes in paper bags. Everything's wrapped in paper. But they sent like a fork with it. And the fork was plastic, but it was like, it said biodegradable on it. And my impression of that sort of stuff is that it sucks. I don't know.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about 4 different kinds of bioplastics. So there's bio-based, biodegradable, compostable, and oxo-degradable. And they all suck to different degrees. So Cool. Like, I love how this one thing still has like 4 million different like things to it. It's so complicated. This took me a large part of my day to research too. It's a lot. But no, what I was going to say is I had ordered from a candy company, some vegan candies, and they had sent me a thing. I had bought like a bulk bag. This was not in June. This was in May. So I'm not as bad for the plastics. I wasn't in the moratorium. But I bought a big bag. So I was like, if I buy a big bag, that's great. It's only one plastic item. That's better than buying a bunch of little ones. And I was like completely shocked to open it and find that what they had done is it was a mix, but instead of mixing it, which is what the word mix would imply, they put it in 50, I counted it, it was more than 50 little bags of plastic. And they all said that they were recyclable, but I don't remember what their code was. But like, and I did put them in the recycling bin, but I don't have that much faith that they're actually being recycled.
That is so frustrating when you try to do a good thing and then it comes and it's like, no, this is exactly not what I wanted.
Yeah, and it's like, it's a fairly nice candy company. I don't want to... Fuck it. It's Squish. Squish, don't do this. So I emailed them.
Yeah, I love Squish. Be better, Squish.
I know, they make such good candy, but like I don't think I'm ever going to buy from them again because I was so mortified by this experience. And I basically emailed them and I was like, yo, this was truly obscene levels of plastic, and I was specifically trying to avoid this by picking a mix. Like, I'm really mad. And they sent me an email back saying, okay, we're looking into biodegradable plastics. And that's nice.
It's not better.
But it's not better. It's really not better. And we'll talk about why. But that's, I think, part of the mentality that's going on right now, right? Consumers want more sustainability. And so companies are trying to look for alternatives, and they're landing on biodegradable or bioplastics. But it's not actually a real solution. And so it's really important that consumers not accept that. So we'll talk about why. There are a bunch of different kinds of bioplastics. The first kind is bio-based plastics. And essentially, bio-based plastics are bioplastics that aren't biodegradable. Did I say the word bio enough in that sentence? So you would think bio-based, that probably means they're biodegradable, but no. Essentially what it means is that they're bio-based, so they're made from plant materials rather than petroleum. But they're not biodegradable because biodegradability essentially depends on the chemical structure and not on like what the source of the plastic is. So if you're producing the same compound, it doesn't matter if that's coming from sugarcane or from oil, if the ultimate compound is the same thing. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah. I have a question that probably you might not know the answer to, but if we can make plastic, why can't we just unmake it and put it back into like a...
Yeah, I mean, I don't know specific. I think you'd have to look at the specific strains of plastic, what particular challenges they pose, but essentially it's really hard to like go back to square one with certain kinds of plastics. But there are lots of smart people working on it, and it may be that there are better technology in the future. I would just, I would caution people against taking the like wait for a sort of
miracle
Deus Ex Machina of, like plastics recycling technology, because in the meantime, we're producing just truly bananas levels of plastic every year. So bioplastics in general are a super small area of plastics production. So less than 1% of the entire plastics industry is bioplastics. And if you take that tiny 1% chunk, more than half of that is just bio-based plastics that aren't actually biodegradable. So more than half of the time when you're getting a bio-based plastic, it's not going to be of the biodegradable kind. It's going to be something that's made from like sugarcane or corn, but that won't actually biodegrade.
And those come with their own issues.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about them. So basically the bioplastics market is, it's dominated by what they call drop-in materials. So that'll be things like bio-based polyethylene or bio-based PET. And essentially the end product of that is more or less the same as the fossil-based or like conventional alternative. It's just from a bio-based source. The reason for that is that if you take a bio-based plastic and make it into the same kind of compound as like a conventional plastic, you then don't need to build new machines and you don't need to get new recycling infrastructure because it's the same thing. So you don't need to make new machines to deal with them. So it's a lot more economical to do these kind of drop-in methods. That's why bio-based is the most common form of bioplastic, basically. And there is a little bit of an advantage to bio-based plastic. Like over its conventional counterpart, bio-based plastics are at the very least made from plants. So they don't solve the trash problem at all. But at the very least, there is some emissions reduction that happens from that because it's not made from fossil fuels. But I mean, the big downside is it doesn't solve the issue of microplastics. It doesn't solve issues of toxicity, and it doesn't solve problems with single-use plastic pollution. None of those are actually addressed by bio-based plastics at all. And also, it's not great from an emissions perspective because when you have these plastics either incinerated or in landfill, they do still then release the stored carbon that was placed in that plastic product, right? So you take the stored carbon from the sugarcane or whatever, when it gets incinerated after it's been disposed of, that releases the CO2 into the air. Or if it goes into a landfill, it produces methane, which is much worse, So on balance, maybe slightly better than petroleum plastic, but not really great. And then there's also the issues of you're now using land to produce corn for plastics instead of for other things that could feed people. And also you're potentially converting wild land. So there's the downside on that. So the TLDR of bio-based plastics is they're the worst kind of bioplastic, but maybe they have a slight edge over conventional plastic. The next one is biodegradable plastics. Category 2. So not all biodegradable plastics are bio-based. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Biodegradable plastics basically just means that it can biodegrade by some length of time in some condition somewhere. I know that's not very specific, but I'll explain why this is actually a really big challenge. Biodegradable plastics are really hard to make. And it's essentially because if you're a chemist trying to design a biodegradable plastic, you need to design a plastic that, first of all, does all the things you want the plastic that you're making to do. And then you also have to ensure that it is a food source for microorganisms, right? So you need it not only to degrade, not only to break down, you also need it to biodegrade. Otherwise, you're just a microplastics machine. That doesn't solve the problem. So essentially, you need to have organisms that can break down the molecule chains, so these long polymer molecule chains, to make new compounds that are sort of shorter and, I don't know, science. They're different. They break them down, they eat them. And that basically means you need the right microbe with the right enzyme for the right plastic. And that's a really hard set of conditions to match.
Yeah, that sounds impossible almost.
Yeah. So
unless the companies that are producing this biodegradable plastic are also taking it back. You know what I mean?
Yes, and that's a huge problem with biodegradable plastics because they'll only work in certain conditions for the most part, unless you build in biodegrading triggers for each potential environment they might end up in, which just becomes Wile E. Coyote complicated, So there are lots of different kinds of biodegradable plastics, and they behave in different ways in different places because there are different microorganisms everywhere. And even if you have a biodegradable plastic that works well and is put in the right environment for it to biodegrade, it's still going to take up to years for it to biodegrade in the environment. So one of the problems too is that so you can get voluntary standards for certifying biodegradable plastics, but usually they'll make reference to biodegradation in specific conditions. So one example is industrial composting, but you have no guarantee that your plastic is going to end up in the particular environment they're tested for. And also they're usually lab-based approximations of the environment that they'll be in. So they're actually optimized. They're going to come out in those tests more efficient than they'll actually behave in the real world, which is another problem. And a third problem is that a lot of plastic ends up in the oceans, which are not super ideal for biodegradation. It's cold, there's not a lot of sunlight, and oftentimes there's not a high concentration of microorganisms. And so trying to figure out, first of all, people are sort of debating, should all biodegradable plastics have to adhere to a marine standard? And if that's true, what does that mean? The ocean is so huge and has so many different ecosystems in it. It's become a real problem. The short version of this is all that in the wrong situation, biodegradable plastics may never break down. So we can never really say for sure if the biodegradable plastic that we're using is ever going to biodegrade in the environment. It all depends on where it ends up. And unless you're specifically dealing with the end use of that product by it's a biodegradable product that works in this rainforest environment and you're putting it in the soil yourself, you have no way of knowing that it's going to end up there. And, even if it eventually does biodegrade, in the meantime, like let's say you have a biodegradable plastic that'll biodegrade in the ocean and it ends up in the ocean, it still might entangle a seabird or something in the meantime.
Or get eaten or... Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a whole thing. So that's biodegradable plastics category 2. Slightly better than bio-based. It does theoretically break down, but there's almost no way of ensuring that it will, so it's not really a solution either.
But it's what every company is leaning towards right now, isn't it?
Yeah, and they shouldn't be. It's a bad solution. So bioplastic 3 is a specific version of biodegradable plastics called compostable plastics, which are compostable plastics. Compostable.
Yeah, those are the ones you see for your bin bag liners for your compost bin. And my impression of those is that they can be composted, but only in certain special facilities that have like extremely high heat machines and stuff like that. Yeah.
Basically, yeah. So compostable plastic, it's basically like a biodegradable plastic that will biodegrade in industrial composting. So if you're going to do that, there are a few things you need to look into. The first one is you need to ensure that it's actually certified compostable, because if it's biodegradable, that's not the same thing. The other thing is that compostable plastics, like you cannot home compost it. It just will not work. It'll still be plastic. And in some cases, it might not be, even in industrial composting, it may not be something that like your curbside composting can do. So you need to check to make sure it's accepted in your area's green bin. So for instance, the city that I live in, Ottawa, does not compost its compostable plastic bags. So,
oh, interesting. I haven't looked to see if Vancouver does. I kind of assumed they did because BC is all about like green.
Yeah. There was like a Fifth Estate investigation, and they found that most Canadian cities don't. So, I mean, Vancouver would be my guess on the one, although I also would have guessed they'd have fluoride in their water, and they don't. So who knows?
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. No wonder my teeth are getting bad since I moved here.
But yeah.
Oh, I just Googled it. It says most municipal food scraps recycling programs in Metro Vancouver currently do not accept plastic items labeled biodegradable or compostable. So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and that's a big problem, right? I mean, I understand why they do it, but so what Ottawa has basically decided to do, and I think it's kind of confusing, but I understand why they've gone for it, is they do accept plastic bags in the compost, which might lead you to believe that they can compost compostable plastic bags. But in reality, all they've done is made this calculus to say, we want people to be composting, and they're more likely to do it if we allow them to use plastic bags. And we figured out a way to get rid of the plastic bags before we compost the stuff. So in reality, if you're composting your compost in like a compostable plastic bag in Ottawa, it's going to be treated the same as other plastic bags. They're just going to take it out and throw it in the landfill. Your other compost, like the stuff inside the bag, is going to get composted, but not the bag itself.
That makes sense. I hate it, but it makes sense.
Yeah. So what I would recommend to people, if you're in that situation and you've been composting with a compostable bag, I mean, first option is if your city gives you a bin, like they do in Ottawa, just use the bin. It's honestly not that much harder. You have to rinse it. It takes 30 seconds. It's not hard. But if you're not comfortable doing that, or if you don't have a bin, another alternative is to use a paper bag. And they do also make compostable paper bags that have like a bio lining that like it won't leak. So make sure that's not made of plastic, because then you're in the same time loop. But but yeah, there are options out there. Don't use a compostable plastic bag unless you know for sure your city composts it, which is usually not the case.
And if you're in Canada, the answer is probably no. If Vancouver and Burnaby don't do it and Ottawa don't do it, then I don't know who would.
No. Maybe Edmonton. They're weirdly good at waste management there.
This is a little bit of an aside that has nothing to do with the episode, but I was talking to my roommate the other day and I was like, you haven't been to Edmonton, right? And he was like, no, I've never been to Northern Canada. And I was like, wait, hold on a second.
It is the northernmost major city in the country.
I know, but like I grew up there and so like it's not even really halfway up the country. So
no.
I never thought of it as north. But that, I was shook. I was like, wait, I'm from the north?
It's definitely not the north, but it is north-ish.
Said like somebody else who obviously grew up in Edmonton.
Oh, man.
All right, sorry. That aside.
The tagline is basically just make sure your municipality is actually going to compost the plastic because usually they don't. And if they don't, you're in the same situation as you were if you were using conventional plastic, which is to say, it sucks. The same goes with that for if there's a lot of like compostable plastic cups or utensils now. It's the same kind of situation. If you don't have somewhere that you specifically know you can compost it, it is not any better than just using conventional plastic. So really make sure that you have a plan for the end use of that if you're going to use it. Otherwise, I'd recommend just like bringing a reusable set of utensils.
Yeah, and just to go quickly back to the Edmonton thing, they also do not accept compostable bags. I just Googled it. So
okay, so nowhere. Definitely not Toronto. Don't even bother checking.
Whoa, some shade.
No, I mean I love Toronto. I'd move back there in a second, but there's no way they do. Everything I know about the city suggests they wouldn't. All right, last category is something called oxo-degradable plastics, which I had never heard of before.
Nope, me neither.
And they are actually worse than bio-based plastics, if you can believe it. They, I think, are the worst of the four options.
How?
So basically what oxoplastics or oxo-degradable plastics are, they're bags that are made from conventional plastics that are then mixed with metal compounds that basically make them fall apart faster. So they degrade, they fall apart, but there's no evidence so far that they actually biodegrade.
So they just turn into microplastics faster than everything else.
Yeah.
What the fuck? Who is advocating for that?
I don't know. Big oxo-degradable plastic. I don't know. But no, it's often a kind of greenwash that you'll see. I think they're mainly like plastic bags because it's mainly targeting the people that have like eco-anxiety around plastic bags. But like, how can you possibly know all of this stuff? It's just so complicated. So people see, oh, this is like a degradable bag. Great. But in reality, no.
Yeah, so the rule of thumb is plastic doesn't degrade. Don't be tricked by labeling that says it does, whether it's composting or biodegrading or just falling apart into microplastic. I mean, I guess that's kind of a degrade, but it's not good.
Yeah, like if there are any of these that I think are potentially a workable solution, I don't think any of them are a solution to the plastics problem. I think there's like room for compostable plastics as like a part of the solution. As a small tool. But before it can actually be a useful tool, we need to actually have a way to compost them, which we don't. So, yeah. So are bioplastics a solution? To sum it up, bioplastics are a tiny portion of the overall plastics market, and half of bioplastics are just bio-based, so that means they are not biodegradable. And then even if the plastic is biodegradable, it probably only biodegrades in certain environments, and we just don't have good systems for ensuring that the plastic you're using is going to end up in a place where it will biodegrade. Compostable plastics can be a partial solution, but only if you know for sure they can actually be composted by wherever you're composting it. Otherwise, these solutions are not actually solutions to plastic pollution. So if we actually do want to solve plastic pollution, you need to address our consumption and disposal of single-use plastics and also short-lived plastic products like polyester, fast fashion.
Fast fashion especially, holy shit. Like,
yeah.
we did a 2-parter on that, and it was deeply upsetting. And if you guys haven't listened to that, go ahead, I guess.
There are dad jokes. It's mostly depressing, but there are some few moments of levity.
Yeah, I threw some pickup lines at Kristen. It was pretty entertaining briefly.
But yeah, I would say generally, like, just bioplastics are a distraction. Instead, what we need to do is focus on reducing plastics, and especially focus on reducing single-use plastics wherever we can. If that's something you're interested in doing, the Plastic Free July website has some useful tips on getting started. And also, like, once you've done the basics, some steps for, what's the second level of getting rid of plastic that you can do in your life. I would recommend you check those out. Otherwise, our Zero Waste episode actually had some really good tips for reducing single-use plastic. So I would recommend listen to more of our episodes. And as we always say, yell at your member of parliament, your councillor, your subnational representative. Let them know that we need to improve our recycling systems and our composting systems so that plastic is actually getting recycled, and so that we're actually composting compostable plastics. And that's all I have.
Wow. There's a lot there. I'm really excited to talk to our Greenpeace representative, actually. I'm glad you were able to line that up. But I feel like we literally just spent an hour defining what plastic is, and we haven't talked about anything else. No labor laws, no environment.
Oh God,
nothing.
I didn't even have time to look at labor at all. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like that was, I mean, honestly, plastic is probably just going to be an ongoing series for us. I guess my call to action for this one is an easy one. Everybody should try a month of plastic free. When we release this, it's going to be midway through July, so you can't really do like a full plastic free July, but you could start on July 20th and go until August 20th. It's, just change the dates a little bit. It was a really, really valuable
Months
exercise.
are arbitrary. You can make your own July.
That's true. 2020 especially, if you're gonna change the date, anything like time has no meaning here.
It's true. Can I give a shout out? I know we haven't done one of these in a while.
Yes, please. Yeah, I love the shout outs.
I discovered another good podcast while researching for this, and it's called the Plastisphere Podcast. It's literally just a podcast devoted to issues of plastic, and it's really good. There was an episode on COVID that was really well researched and looked at we've complained about this a few times on the podcast, but like the plastics lobby has really capitalized on the pandemic. And the latest episode of the Plastisphere podcast did a really good job of breaking down how that was true in a way that was empirically convincing for me.
Cool. We'll link to them and I'll check it out because, as you know, I am a podcast addict and I will for sure be checking out that show. Thank you. That's a good shout out.
Love it.
So nice.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us, listeners. And thank you in advance for joining us on the next episode with our interview because it's going to be really good. We haven't done it yet, so I'm just assuming because we're the best.
Love it.
Yeah. Great. You can catch us on Twitter at Pullback Podcast. We are also on Instagram and Facebook, a little bit less active there. Hit us up. We love hearing from our listeners. If you have any suggestions for future episodes, we're not really looking because we have so many to discuss, but we'd be interested to hear what you want to hear anyways. Thanks for listening, guys. Catch you soon.
I love how right away you were like, okay, yeah, Kristen, of course we're going to have a 20-minute episode. Sure.
I was like, hey, I don't know, I don't know what your research looks like. But I was also like, plastic is huge. So I feel like it's going to spiral out of control really quickly.